Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today I'll be reading on this section on reflections from and about Longpo Cha. Be reading from Stillness Flowing, beginning on page 664, on the chapter, or in the chapter Out of Compassion, and then later page 98 from the chapter A Life Inspired, on the theme of Tudong. Killing the defilements of Ta Soi. After Longpo became abbot of Wat Pah Pong, he did not completely abandon the practice of Tudong. In the early years, in particular, when he was still in good health, and there were few monks in the monastery, every now and again he would simply walk out of Wat Pah Pong and into the countryside. Usually, he would take monks with him, occasionally laymen. One of the laymen who accompanied him on such journeys later became a monk, and one of the best loved and colorful characters in the Sangha. Ta Soi, quoted above describing his first meeting with Longpo, had been a larger-than-life figure in the local community before meeting Longpo, his dissolute and criminal lifestyle earning him the title of Naklang, which, footnote, this word Naklang is difficult to translate. It lies on the spectrum between rascal and villain. Ta Soi was near to the rascal end of the spectrum. Gangster works. His greed was legendary, and in his old age, he had many stories to tell about how Longpo had set about taming the coarse fellow he had once been. Quote, he took us on Tudong out to Buntarik. There were 6 of us to start with, but 2 ran away on the first night. As the days wore on, more and more ran away, until in the end there was only me left. I was homesick. He said he'd take me for a year, and the more I wanted to go back, the further he'd take me. I just gave in and took what came. Wherever we went, I'd always have my eyes out for s'mores. One night, he made me sleep by a bamboo clump, even though it was obviously the local toilet place and stunk of excrement. As the dew fell, the smell got even worse. When I complained, he scolded me, quote, don't make such a fuss. There's more crap in your intestines than there is out there. End quote. We reached Ku Muong, and I came across a beautiful samor tree. He told me to climb up and shake the branches. The s'mores cascaded down. I made a bundle for them in my kamoi cloth. So now I had to carry Longpo's bowls and the s'mores, and his shoulder bag, which was also heavy. Longpo didn't carry anything at all. As we walked along, I wanted to throw some of the s'mores away, but then we came to another tree, even more bountiful than the last one, and Longpo had me collect another great pile. I thought that he would help me carry something, but he refused. I tasted a few of the s'mores from the first tree, a few from the second tree, and the diarrhea came on in a big way. My bags were too bulky and heavy to put down in time. Longpo had to teach me the field method. Quote, there's no need to sit down. Stand and grasp hold of a tree. Crap like a water buffalo. You can do that, can't you? End quote. So I stood and defecated until my bowels were empty. 10 o'clock at night, and we were still walking. He wouldn't rest. We reached a stream, and he crossed it on a dead tree. I couldn't manage that and waded through the stream. The water was deep, my bag was heavy, and I couldn't get up the other bank. Longpo had to climb down and drag me up. It was midnight before he would stop walking, and I was completely soaked. "This is so much suffering," I groaned. Quote, "You've come on this trip to see suffering, so that you can go beyond it." End quote. Longpo said this as if it would be some kind of comfort to me. Quote, "It's through seeing suffering that you become wise." End quote. I was exhausted. As he spoke, I started to drift off to sleep, and so he scolded me again. "I'm giving you a teaching and you fall asleep." End quote. But as I lay there, I noticed he was using my chamois cloth to drive the mosquitoes away from my body. I slept for a long time. Whenever I opened my eyes, he was still sitting there. I couldn't help asking him, "Longpo, aren't you tired? You haven't lain down at all." He responded, quote, "The more tired I am, the better the meditation." And then he had another go at me. "People without a thought in their heads are only interested in lying about. Even when you set them an example, they don't take it." End quote. "Oh, come on, I'm tired." I couldn't stop myself arguing with him. Finally, I asked him if we could go back. Quote, "All right, if that's what you want." End quote. He must have seen that I really was far gone. The next morning, Longpo and Tasoi took the road back to the monastery. A car passed. In those days, there weren't any proper roads. Cars had to go along the buffalo tracks. When he saw us, the driver stopped and ran over to invite us to go with him. Longpo gave a grunt of assent. I prepared to get into the car, but no. The driver came over to repeat his invitation. Longpo gave another grunt, but he made no move to get into the car, and it drove off without us. When I started grumbling, Longpo turned on me. "Have you come to ride in cars or walk on Tudong? Couldn't we have at least given them a bag of s'mores? And how do we know where he's going?" By now I was getting angry. The car was moving farther and farther away. I said, "Longpo, are you trying to kill me or what?" Longpo replied, quick as a flash, quote, "Of course. I've brought you here with me to kill your defilements. Everything that comes out of your mouth is defilement. If you don't come and do something like this, then how will you ever be free from defilements? Try lying around doing nothing and see if you get liberated. All that'll happen will be that suffering will overwhelm you. Suffering has to be known before you can go beyond it and realize happiness. I've brought you to make merit, to look for merit. Do you see that or not? Merit and defilement both lie within us. Cravings never come to an end. You make 10 baht and you want 100. You get 100 and you want 1,000. Now look, your craving has stopped because you feel nothing but physical tiredness. You don't want anything at all. If you did get anything, what would you do with it? Don't you realize that you're going to die? Each day, try to think of death. You're going to die, you know that, don't you?" End quote. Longpo went on like this at great length before turning around to question me further. "Do rich people die? Do poor people die?" "Yes, they all die," I answered irritably. "Well then, don't you think you're going to die? The poor die, and so do the rich. You have to be liberated before you can be happy, so what's to be done?" He ended up asking me a question as usual. "Become a monk," I said, thinking it was a pretty intelligent answer. Quote, "If you become a monk, will you be free of suffering if you don't practice? Karma means action. We do good and we do evil. If we do good, then we get good results. If we do evil, we get evil results. So what's there to be done but to do good? And that's what you're doing. I've brought you to do good, because passing through the trials and tribulations will lead you beyond suffering." That afternoon, we came to a village and stopped for a rest in one of the adjoining fields. There were people around grazing their cattle, and when they came over, Longpo called out to me, "Get some soft drinks. Bring over 3 or 4 packs." I got angry. I wanted to keep the money, and he was having me buy drinks for buffalo herders. In the end, they couldn't finish it all, and he told them to take the remainder home with them. When we got back to the Wat, he asked me, "How much money is left? We need bricks and cement." I said it would have been a better idea to keep the whole lot for bricks and cement instead of spending it on soft drinks. Quote, "No, that would have been a bad idea, because we wouldn't have practiced giving, and the buffalo grazers wouldn't have had their drink. They were tired, and they must have been thirsty. When you drank some, you were refreshed, weren't you?" "Yes," I replied sheepishly. "Well then," he said, and started off on another sermon. "When we make others happy, it makes us happy. When you've received that kind of happiness, then what more do you want? You have to raise your mind high. When the floods come, only the houses built on high land stay dry. If you indulge in low, coarse things, then your mind becomes baser, and whatever you do, you'll never see the Dhamma." So beginning on page 97, Teachings from a Barking Deer. On a number of occasions referred to above, Longpor's distinctive way of reflecting on Dhamma has been revealed. It consisted of a robust internal dialogue, a series of questions and answers, or a debate between two opposing viewpoints, took place in his mind until the truth was arrived at, some valuable lesson learned, some decision made. That skill was in evidence again, and probably saved his life in the heart of the mountains of Nakhon Phanom. Longpor had not come across a village for a few days, and he was starting to become weak from lack of food. He felt tired and lightheaded. His legs were rubbery, climbing uphill, and his breath short. And then a fever struck. He lay in the shade of a tree, too exhausted to move. He took stock of the situation. Little water, no sign of a village, and his body on fire. As Longpor made peace with the realization that his chances of survival were low, a disturbing thought arose in his mind. Suppose a hunter should discover his corpse and send news back to Ubon. How distressing and inconvenient it would be for his family to have to come such a long way to arrange a funeral. He groped in his bag for his monk's identification booklet. If the worst came to the worst, he would burn it so that nobody would ever know who he was. Just then, he was roused from the somber thoughts by the sound of a barking deer echoing loudly through the forested valley below. It made him ask himself, "Do barking deer and other creatures get ill?" Yes, of course they do. They've got bodies just as we do. Do they have medicines? Do they have doctors who give them injections? No, of course not. They make do with whatever shoots and leaves they can find. The creatures in the wild don't have medicines. They have no doctors to look after them, and yet they don't seem to die out. The forest is full of them and they're young, isn't it? Yes, that's true. These simple thoughts were enough to shake Longpor out of the despair that was enveloping his mind. He struggled up into a sitting position and forced himself to sip some water. He crossed his legs and started to meditate. By morning, the fever had abated. Weapons of Dhamma. Speaking to his disciples decades later, Longpor spoke fondly of his Tudong years. In those days, I didn't even have a water filter. Requisites were very hard to come by. I had a tiny aluminum dipper that I was very possessive of. I still smoked in those days. There were no matches then, but I had a bamboo tinderbox with half a lemon skin as a cap. At night time, when I was weary from walking meditation, I'd sit down and light a cigarette. I reckon that if there were ever any spirits around, the sound of striking that flint, bok bok, in the middle of the night would have frightened them away. When I look back on the days when I was practicing alone, it was painful and full of the most challenging ordeals, but at the same time, I really enjoyed it. The enjoyment and the suffering went together, pretty much the same as eating grilled pekka leaves dipped in chili sauce and ground ginger. It's delicious, but it's hot. You're eating it, and the snot's flowing down. But you can't stop because it tastes so good. You're eating away, and at the same time you're groaning. Oh, oh. That's what the practice was like in those days. You have to be really resolute in practice to practice Dhamma. It's not a light thing. It's heavy. You have to put your life on the line. A tiger's going to eat you. An elephant's going to trample you. Then so be it. You think like that. When you've kept your precepts purely, there's nothing more to worry about. It's as if you're already dead. If you die, then it's as if there's nothing to die, and so you're not afraid. This is called the weapon of Dhamma. I've been on mountaintops all over the country, and this single weapon of Dhamma has always triumphed. You completely let go. You're bold. You're ready to die. You risk your life. As I thought about it, I saw how the weapon of the Buddha strengthens the mind. It's the best of all weapons. I kept reflecting, looking, thinking, seeing. When the mind truly sees, it penetrates things completely. Suffering is like this. The cessation of suffering is like this. And so there's ease and contentment. Someone who sees suffering but doesn't penetrate right through it, who's content with feelings of inner peace, they have no way of knowing this. If someone is unafraid of death, if they're ready to give their life, then they won't die. If you let suffering go beyond suffering, it comes to an end. Comprehend it. See the truth of things. See the nature of things. That has real value. It makes the mind powerful. Do you think it would be possible for such a mind to be afraid of anybody? To be afraid of the forest? To be afraid of wild animals? It is staunch and strong. The heart of a meditation monk is incredibly resolute. Through meditation, anybody who is ready to give their life for the Dhamma develops a mind that is great in size and scope, utterly firm. The ability to let go becomes sublime. All this is called vitakka. Footnote. In this paragraph, Longpor explains the 5 mental states that define the first state of deep absorption, concentration, jhana. Raising something up in the mind, and then vichara, examining it. These 2 things keep working together until the matter is fully penetrated. At this point, rapture, piti, arises in the mind. As I thought of practicing walking meditation or of the virtues of the Buddha or the Dhamma, the rapture seeped through my whole body and thoroughly refreshed it. As I sat there, my mind overflowed with joy in my actions. All the obstacles I'd overcome, and my hair stood on end and tears started to fall. I felt even more inspired to struggle and persevere. There was no question of discouragement arising, whatever happened. There was vitakka, vichara, rapture, and a bliss accompanied by awareness. The mind was upheld by vitakka and vichara, and stabilized by the bliss. At that moment, you could say it was dependent on the power of absorption, if you like, I don't know. That's just how it was. If you want to call it absorption, then go ahead. Before long, vitakka and vichara were abandoned. Rapture disappeared, and the mind had a single focus, ekaggata. Samadhi was firmly established, and the lucid calm that is a foundation for wisdom had arisen. So I gained insight that it's through practice that knowing and seeing take place. Studying and thinking about it is something else altogether. Even the thoughts and assumptions you make about how things will be are included in the things that you see clearly, and they are revealed to be in contradiction to the way things are. So now I was content. Fat or thin, healthy or ill, I was content. I never wondered where my mother was, or where this or that friend or relation was. There was none of that. I just resolved in my mind that if I died then, I died. and that was all there was to it. I had no worries. That was how firm my mind was. And so there was no more holding back. My mind was invigorated and pushed me on. However many Dhamma talks you listen to, however much you study, the knowledge you gain from that doesn't take you all the way to the truth, and so it can never free you from doubts and hesitation. You have to practice. If your knowledge is a realization of the truth, the things come to a conclusion. I don't know how you'd put it into words, but it just happens naturally. It's inevitable. It's nothing other than the natural mind, pakati citta, arising. I think we have time for this. Explosions, page 90. Longpor continued on his wanderings, looking for a peaceful place to practice until one day he reached Bangkok Yao, where he came across a deserted monastery about a half a kilometer from the edge of the hamlet. His mind felt light and tranquil. It was as if there was some kind of gathering of forces. Quote, "One night there was a festival in the village. Sometime after 11 o'clock, while I was practicing walking meditation, I began to feel a bit strange. In fact, this feeling, an unusual kind of calmness and ease, had first appeared during the day. When I became weary from walking, I went into the small grass-roofed hut to sit and was taken by surprise. Suddenly, my mind desired tranquility so intensely that I could hardly cross my legs quickly enough. It just happened by itself. Almost immediately, the mind did indeed become peaceful. It felt firm and stable. It wasn't that I couldn't hear the sounds of merrymaking in the village. I could still hear them, but I could also choose not to hear them. It was strange. When I paid no attention to the sounds, there was silence. If I wanted to hear them, I could, and I felt no inner irritation. Within my mind, it was as if there were two objects standing there together, but with no connection between them. I saw the mind and its sense object, and established in different areas, like a kettle and a spittoon placed by a monk's seat. I realized that if concentration is still weak, you hear sounds, but when the mind is empty, then it's silent. If a sound arises and you look at the awareness of it, you see that the awareness is separate from the sound. I reflected, well, how else could it be? That's just the way it is. They're unconnected. I kept considering this point until I realized, this is important. When continuity, santati, between things is broken, then there's peace, santi. Formerly, there had been santati, and now santi had emerged from it. I continued with my meditation. My mind was completely indifferent to all external phenomena. If I'd wanted to stop meditating at this point, I could have done so at my leisure. Would it have been because I was lazy, because I was tired or bored? No, not at all. There was nothing of that sort in my mind. There was simply an abiding sense of just rightness. If I'd stopped, it would have been merely that. There was no defilement involved. Sometime later, I stopped to rest, but it was only my posture that changed. My mind remained in the same state. I reached for my pillow, intending to sleep. As I lay down, my mind was still as peaceful as it had been before. Just at the moment that my head touched the pillow, within my mind there was a sense of bending or inclining inwards. Where to, I don't know. Then it was as if a switch released electric power into a cable. My body exploded with a tremendous bang. The awareness at that moment was extremely subtle. Having passed that point, it slipped away inside to a realm of nothingness. Nothing could find its way into that place. Nothing could reach it. The awareness stopped there for a short while and then withdrew. But I don't mean that it was an intentional withdrawal. I was merely the witness, the knower. My mind steadily withdrew until it had returned to its normal state. Once my mind had reverted to normality, a question arose. What happened? And the question appeared. These things are natural phenomena, and the answer appeared. These things are natural phenomena. There's no need to be perplexed by them. Those few words were enough for my mind to accept what was going on. After a short pause, it started to incline inwards again, and at a certain point met the same switch. This time, my body disintegrated into fine fragments, and I slipped within again. There was a completely impenetrable silence. It was superior to the first time. After an appropriate length of time, my mind withdrew. Everything happened automatically. I didn't exercise any will or influence on what happened. I didn't try to make things happen according to a plan, to enter that state or to leave it in any particular way. I just maintained awareness, simply kept observing. My mind withdrew to a normal state again, and I didn't speculate about it. I sat there in contemplation, and then it occurred for a third time, and the whole world disintegrated. Earth, vegetation, trees, mountains, people, everything became the space element. It was an end of all things. At this final stage, there was nothing at all. I dwelled in that state for as long as it wanted me. I don't know how such a place could exist. It was difficult to fathom, and it's difficult to talk about. There's nothing that it could be compared to. The third time the mind stayed in that realm was the longest, and when the time was up, it withdrew to a normal state. Those 3 times, what could they be called? Who could know? I've been describing the natural state of the mind. I haven't spoken in the technical language of consciousness, citta, and mental concomitants, cittasika, because it's not necessary. I had the faith to get down to the practice, to stake my life. When it reached the time for this kind of thing to emerge, the whole world turned upside down. If anyone had seen me then, they might have thought me insane. In fact, for someone with no self-possession, that kind of experience might drive them insane. Because after it, nothing is the same as before. People don't look the same anymore. But actually, it's only you who's different in every way. Their thoughts go in one direction, and yours go in another. They talk about one thing, and you talk about another. They go up there, and you come down here. You're completely at odds with the human race. I didn't know if that was, that third reading, the explosions, was that what Ajahn Chah later refers to in terms of speculation about his stream entries? Or is that the opportunity later, the instant later, where he's comes down from that mountain, and then he says everything changes?
I can't remember the context myself. I thought that was also the one, and I don't know if there was more to it than that. There was something like that, if that wasn't the one that... I don't know if it was when somebody questioned him later, or if he just made the comments himself afterwards that, essentially he didn't know what that whole experience meant, and it was, a number of mental phenomena, and then just set it aside and didn't think about it again. I don't remember if it was that one or a different one, but that wasn't in what you read, but I thought that was a significant kind of thing that he went through this description of, everything exploding into pieces and all that kind of stuff, and then he basically said, well, I really don't know what that was all about.
I actually took it when he said that, I was like a teaching around doubt. Meaning doubt arose, it was spinning off into doubt. What was that? Wanting to label it, define it, attach a term to it. And he said, well, it was what it was. And, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. No, really. I guess for me, it was quite a significant teaching, actually.
Yeah.
As opposed, well, I guess I couldn't clarify that.
Yeah, no, it always confused me because the way he presented it, it sounded like there was something significant about it with, all the different experiences that he went through, and then, I didn't experience it so much as when he made that kind of contradictory statement, or not knowing what it's about, or not so much in terms of doubt, but just sort of like more of a statement, is how I interpret it anyway, the statement of there's a lot of different ways that the mind can manifest, and experiences that one has in terms of conscious experience that are very, very, different from what we usually normally experience in terms of conscious awareness, and that essentially, whatever phenomena happen, they still have to be looked at in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta. This is not who I am. This is not, this is not self. This is mind. There's mind and the mind objects, and the separation between the knowing and the object. Sort of how I interpreted that whole series of events that he then said, well, I don't really know what it was about. It was more like a teaching on all sorts of things can happen, and, just, see it through the lens of Dhamma.
I may have found what you're referencing, Ajahn.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure, but it was actually, because later on there's a scenario on Lanka Mountain, after he comes into contact with Ajahn Wang, and he's sort of at an impasse in his practice, and Ajahn Wang directs him, and then he has this experience where everything changes, and I think this is the one that Ajahn Jayasara says people speculated was stream entry, because then he immediately goes and teaches, but at the end of it he also says something maybe around what you're saying. However much you listen to Dhamma talks, however much you study, although the knowledge that results may be correct, it doesn't reach the truth itself. And if that's the case, then there's no end to doubts and hesitation. But when the truth is realized, there's completion. Then whatever anyone might say or think on the subject is irrelevant. It's naturally and irrevocably just that way. Maybe that's not completely what you're saying, but it...
Yeah, no, there's something different. I'll have to go back and look and see if I can find what I was thinking of.
Do either of the Ajahns have any stories of being tormented by any of your teachers, and any benefit you've had from the torment?
Ajahn Yaniko's smiling.
Longpa Liam's kind of like that, if you're a Zupatak. Yeah. But nothing to that level. But like one of the Longpa Liam does something that is the same that Master Hua would do to test people, like when you're your whole day is full of duties for him and you have no time for anything else, then he'll give you something else to do, and then he'll see what you do with that. So like it was Katina season, I was a Zupatak. This is like having to clean his kuti, going to these all-night Dhamma talks a few times a week, and then like at a nondescript time during the day, he walks up and he just hands me his robe. He's like, here, wash my robe. It's like, but I don't have time. And then he just sort of walks away.
Yeah, I think that Ajahn, when I first ordained with Ajahn Pasano, he was pretty strict in some ways, but he was never the Toraman kind of Ajahn, at least for me. I think if he had any inclinations in that direction in his early years, he maybe abandoned them by the time he got here to Abhayagiri.
Sometimes we can try to do it to others too, like we can try to be Longpo Cha and it can have a really bad result.
Right, yeah.
I guess the key difference there is just, faith, perhaps, because the layperson in the story seemed to have pretty much unshakable faith in Longpo Cha. He never, he really was suffering, but he wasn't But doubting Lumpur Cha was just almost not a possibility for him.
Trust is another thing that one has to have. You have to trust that your teacher has got your best interest in mind for that to be effective.
And another crucial element, I think, is character type, and maybe also cultural grounding. Because basically, torment, like the torment, is pounding, right? It's heating the metal and pounding the metal. And if you've got some bonkers, neurotic, judgmental Westerner, it might not be exactly, it might be not what it's called for, especially if it's junior monastic.
Also, too, what comes to mind is just the energy of the teacher when they're sort of offering that kind of teaching. I mean, I haven't really had a teacher, give me, Toruman or really hard treatment, but I don't know, you kind of listen or you're around teachers that give very strong teachings. Tanajan Dun's an example from my, experience. Lumpu Ben is another teacher, and sometimes it's like you can look at a transcript or you sort of get the translation of what they were saying. It can be like super hardcore death contemplation or food contemplation or a suba or whatever, but like while you're receiving that teaching, their energy is incredibly bright and soft and open. And so those teachings, they have a very different flavor when they're offered out of compassion or with goodwill. And I think maybe similarly in the case with this Naklang and Luang Por, like Luang Por was not acting out of spite or anger or sort of, he was probably manifesting an incredible amount of compassion, maybe kind of like tough love type compassion, but certainly, I assume that his students, could feel that whenever they got the stuff. So, yeah, I just think too, like, for me, I've learned a lot by watching teachers who are, and Luang Por Pasan was an example, and other monks in Thailand that I was around who kept very strict kowat, or very, very high standards of practice, but yet they were not sort of like totally wound up about it. And seeing that combination of like strict teachings or strict practice with the lightness or the metta with it, sort of fueled by this sense of brightness, that kind of almost contradictory sense gave me a really good role model, and also like kind of good insight as to what, how the training and how the Dhamma manifests, those, in that way. Because normally in a worldly sense, like, really high standards or really tough training goes hand in hand with, like drill sergeants and, screaming and anger and uptightness. But when you see it manifest from a teacher, out of purity and compassion, wow, it can kind of shift one's perspective on what it means to be well trained or well, established in the Dhamma and training. It's hard, and I think Ajahn Chah does a good job, but it's really hard to capture that in text. Yeah.
You have to kind of see it in action.
And one thing that I've noticed is that when you have seen it in action or got a taste of it, then you can actually read that compassion into the words. Yeah. And it's very interesting because you'll feel it, but if you show those same words to somebody else, that they're not going to feel it. It's definitely a caution.